This particular episode was inspired by David Letterman's Stupid Human Tricks. There are no stupid human tricks in this particular episode, but I'd like to be able to give you guys a rundown on how not to be a bad photographer, or should I say, the bad habits a good photographer must avoid when he's out and about doing his craft. Of course, some of you might be thinking, some of you might be offended by some of the things I might mention, but while I was writing this episode down on paper, I was actually thinking about the bad habits that inexperienced photographers do every time they're in the field, or when I run into an inexperienced photographer in the field. And let's just let's make a rundown of the bad habits one should avoid if he or she wants to make a good photograph. This is quite common among those who are financially well off, who can afford the latest and greatest stuff. Now, in the more than 50 years that I've been into photography, well, close to 50 years now, I've never had the luxury of owning top of the line high end cameras, even back in the days of film. I had a chance to use high end cameras simply because they were issued to me as a working photojournalist. But after I resigned, I had to turn everything in. So there's that. But the common thing that I noticed is the dog yapping. Now, buying skill is a common thing among, I should say, amateur photographers who can afford the gear but do not have the experience behind it. So there's always this mentality that if they had the best gear, the best cameras and lenses, that their photographs would be equally great. And, this is something that's been going on, I guess, for a really long time, even during the days of film. So, the irony behind that is number two, people who buy the best gear, usually the larger cameras and the longer lenses. I often see people buying the best gear and yet scrimping on the cost of, or buying the stupidest toothpick tripod, so to speak. And I've already seen a guy who had, back in the day, a Canon 50D, and he had a really large lens, but the tripod was really not up to spec. So lo and behold, not surprisingly, one of the tripod legs broke, and his camera ended up in the drink because he was shooting by the seashore. And naturally, if there's a body of water, that's usually where the camera falls. So I never had the luxury of having the finances to pick up the best cameras, but early on in my career, I made sure that I had a really good tripod. And when we say good tripod, you have to check on the specifications. It's always indicated how much or how heavy a camera, how heavy a load your tripod will carry, which is why I opted for Manfrotto tripods. I have two. One is a travel tripod, and one is being used to shoot this particular video right now. And I never really had a problem. I put some heavy lenses on it, I put some heavy cameras on it. I guess the heaviest I put on my tripod was Nikon FM2 with the motor drive and a 300 millimeter 2.8 lens. And that's a really heavy setup. So I never regretted spending the money on good tripods. If you're going to splurge on anything, splurge on a really good tripod. Doesn't matter if you had entry level cameras or very simple stuff. As long as you put these things on a really good tripod, and that's really important. Is something I usually see in beginners or those who are not necessarily into photography or have not had the experience, I should say, is what I call the reluctant finger, which is basically not doing a follow through on the shot. So they go take a shot and lift their shutter finger. I find it funny because that's a nice way to jerk your shot. So I see people like with the best equipment doing this. Puts a heavy strain and it really shakes the camera a lot. Not like when you do a follow through on your shot and not let your finger go after the shutter releases. That's the only way to do it. So there you go. It's a simple symptom of an inexperienced photographer in the midst. Now, if you're using a DSLR, especially back in the day, I see people using DSLRs with the live view and they're, holding the camera at almost near arm's length. And that makes the shot really unstable. The nice thing about the mirrorless camera and even this EOS R100 is that, oh boy. So now seriously you might ask, so what's the use of the LCD screen on your camera if not to check your focus and exposure? Well, the thing is, if you're using a DSLR, you need to use the viewfinder because, like I said, if you hold the camera at arm's length, it's not a very stable platform. But if you use the viewfinder, everything is in check. Everything is in check. You have 3 points of contact, basically, like holding a rifle. For another, using the LCD screen all the time drains your batteries even faster. Now, camera makers designed the live view for DSLRs and mirrorless cameras for you to use it while the camera is on a tripod, and that's the largest possible monitor that you could use for checking your exposure and checking your composition. And that's about it. That's all that the LCD screen was meant to do. The nice thing about mirrorless cameras nowadays is that I can use the viewfinder to shoot videos, and for one that gives a very stable platform, especially when I'm doing handheld shots, handheld movie making, so to speak. That's very useful. But otherwise, for any other purpose, I would be fireworks. I would be using the LCD screen when the camera is on a tripod. That's it. I've talked about this in the past, and that's the dependence on the audible beep for focusing. Now, I remember a commenter or a viewer commenting that that's not fair to people who don't have really good eyesight. Well, ever since autofocus technology was invented, cameras had a way to confirm focus within the viewfinder. Or, for one, even if you don't confirm it on the viewfinder, the single servo autofocus feature simply ensures that you cannot take a shot unless the lens is in absolute focus on your subject. And that's even without the need to hear the audible beep, because like I said, when you use the audible signal or the audible beep to focus, you're training your ears to focus, not your eyes. And there lies the disconnect, I should say. So learn to focus with your eyes. For Nikon cameras, there's usually a green dot that indicates that your subject is in focus. Otherwise, you can use the old school way of setting. One way that we used to focus old AF cameras back in the day was to set your focus brackets right at the center of the frame. So what you do is you get your subject into focus and then recompose your shot after. It's a little slower, it's an old school method, but it's ensuring that you have your subject in focus. Another way that we used to do it is to use the hyperfocal technique, where we have to predict, we would know where a subject is passing through, especially for photojournalists. If we knew that a VIP was coming at this particular area, then we focus on the area, set our focus there, and when the subject comes in, just shoot away. And that's basically an old school method that never fails me, and I still use that particular technique to this day. Now, along with using the LCD screen to focus and compose, is the poor camera gripping and the stance. Now, this is something that I notice with inexperienced photographers. When they see a scene, it doesn't matter how they see it, they'll always do it from a standing position. Now, as a creative photographer, you have to learn how to move around your subject and pick the right angle. Not everything should be taken while standing up. You can crouch, you can lower yourself down, or you can get a little higher. Now, I see this problem especially with parents taking photographs of their children. Doesn't matter if they use an SLR or maybe even a smartphone. They just, you know, they're looking down on the kid. Now, with children, it's best to go down almost to their eye level, so they don't look too small or they don't look dwarfed. So, for those of you who don't know what chimping is, it's usually taking a shot and playing back looking at the playback of your previous exposures. Now, as someone who's been shooting film for over 40 years now, I've done away with that. I'm so used to taking the shot and taking the shot and taking the shot and not knowing how I did, if my photographs are good or bad, until like the following day at the soonest or the following week at the latest. So I hardly ever chimp unless I'm in a commercial shoot where I really need to check on my exposures and do spot checks on my LCD screen. And that's about it. And lastly, one of the worst habits that inexperienced photographers have, taking really bad shots, hoping that they can fix things in post production. And I really have no words to describe how bad that is. But it's so ironic that with today's smart technology, with cameras equipped with AI and stuff like that, there are still photographers who insist on taking a mediocre shot right now and then editing everything on post. And that's a really bad way to do some shooting. So, seriously, if you want to get good at what you do, there's basically two disciplines. One is with the camera, and another is in post production. But if you do things right in camera, then there'll be very little need for post production. The most I do is like pop the colors or maybe do some cropping if I'm not happy with the composition, and that's about it. But otherwise, I make it I make every effort to do things right in camera and not on the computer. I don't know if you can still call that photography if you do it on a computer. Might as well shoot with a really dumb camera, with a really basic camera, and work on your computer all day. But I simply don't have the time or the patience to do that. I have all the patience when I'm in the field, but not on the computer. No way. I hope, guys, those pro tips help you out in some way. And this is my way of giving back to those who've been supportive of the channel. As of last count, I already have 121 subscribers. Thanks, guys, for clicking that subscribe button. And I hope to do more how-tos, and for those who are new to photography, I hope these tips help you out in some way, shape, or form. At any rate, that's all I have for you right now. This has been Direct Abs, the Shutter Maniac. Make serendipity happen.